Welcome to DnDTime Talks, the show where we forget to put spectator into the chat.
Spectator betrayed us.
He has a lot of business and a lot of his own errands to run, so he can't, expect too much or be here every time right at the beginning. Hello, chat. Hi, how are you all out there today?
I'm doing good. How about you? I know you didn't ask me.
Yeah, Jeremy, no one wants to know except for me. I want to know, and I'm glad to hear that you're doing well. And also, I'm glad to see the Forgotten One and Max Meister and Sword Co here, and I'm sure the others that are lurking deep within the shadows. Also
And
hanging out.
more than that, everyone seems to be doing at the very least good, but Max is doing great. This is even better.
Oh yeah,
I'm glad y'all doing so good.
Average. Yeah, me too. Me too.
I'm really excited about this chat today. We're gonna be talking about magic. That was magic I did. You didn't see it because it was so fast, but there was
well on
magic.
on the other side of the room. There's you can't see it because it's an unseen servant, but it's there now.
Hey Pete, what is that behind your ear?
Wow. Wow, Jeremy, you
Wow,
this little
I'm
toy
great.
sword behind my ear. All right, we're talking about magic. If you have any thoughts or comments, well, actually, Jeremy, I would like to acknowledge we haven't done this show together in like over a month.
It's been a long time. We've been very busy. Now, yeah, hopefully it's gonna be a good one back. Again, we're probably both a little rusty in our own ways, but I'm sure it's gonna be exciting. Now we're talking about magic. We're talking about like a very specific kind of thing about magic.
Yeah.
And that's how to make magic cool.
Yeah, if you want magic in your game for your players to be like, whoa, magic, then follow these simple instructions.
We're not talking about lore. We're not talking about the history of magic in D&D. We're not talking about magic systems even so much. We're talking about how to make 5th edition D&D, how to make the magic in this game cool, exciting, engaging, and interesting for your player. And, some of this advice is multifaceted. You can use it in other role-playing games. But others will be very specific to 5th edition. Spirit Guardian Puppies! We're going to talk about Spirit Guardian Puppies.
Spirit Guardian Puppies are, I think, going to be a very large part of this conversation in the abstract, actually. Yeah, so if you have thoughts on what we're saying, or you just want to chime in, hit us up on Twitch chat. We'll be looking at it as we go through. Additionally, after the stream, as always, we'll be doing our segment Ask Pete and Jeremy, where you can hop onto our Discord and ask us questions, be they D&D related or any silly nonsense that you want to ask us, and you can do that on our Discord, which is linked below.
Yeah, and you can get a link to Discord in the chat right now! Exclamation point, Discord! Also, Frog, I'm glad you're transcribing the music for your mountain dulcimer. I'm very excited to hear it at some point. It's a cool instrument.
It is a cool instrument. That's awesome.
And yeah, and speaking of cool stuff, bad transition, let's talk about making magic cool. So obviously, dungeon masters and players alike, they want their games to be fun and exciting. No one wants to play in or run a lame game. And one of the places that, interestingly enough, I don't know about you, Pete, but I feel like, most games fall really flat, is actually in making magic interesting and like magic.
I'm absolutely of that opinion. I think a lot of games end up making magic feel kind of like the Force feels in the prequels, as opposed to how the Force feels in the original movies, which is
a great way of putting it. Holy shit.
Yeah, which is really cool and mysterious versus I cast the fireball spell, it deals 8d6 damage, which is kind of what I think we're going to be getting at as we go through. But it's also tricky to do, and the game doesn't really tell you to do that at all, because it codifies all the magic so heavily. Everything in 5e, all the spells that you're going to cast are, you're not using magic, you're casting a spell that has, it's a first level spell, and it is an enchantment spell, and it lasts for this duration, and it takes these exact components. It's so precise, it kind of takes a lot of the mystique out of what is supposed to be something really like unique and fantastical in your world.
Yeah, and we're not saying that spells like Fireball don't feel awesome. They feel awesome because they're good. Spirit Guardians, Inflict Wounds, Spiritual Weapon, Fireball, Lightning Bolt. All of these are super classic and super powerful spell choices that are really commonly used in 5th edition D&D. And we're not going to talk as much about power, more of using things in less expected ways, and beyond that, just making things feel mysterious, making it feel like there's still things to discover. This is actually, I feel, really important for like wizard characters, because I feel like that's half the desire of wanting to play a wizard. It's wanting to push the envelope, discover this new thing. I've not met a wizard player that I've played with in like a long-term campaign that hasn't wanted to at some point try and make their own spell.
That's really
what
fun.
I mean? Yeah, it's like that's like one of the fantasies of playing a wizard. I want to create. Oh yeah, Maximilian's Earth and Grass.
That's what I was about to say.
Jeremy's big smile.
Jeremy's big smile is a really good example, and the game almost, without directly telling you, they kind of push you in that direction by putting lore into these spells. Mordenkainen's Faithful Hound, Bigby's Hand, Tensor's Floating Disc. They have all of these different spells that are named after people. I want spells to be named after me 100%.
Yeah. Well, and why, Pete? Why do people not immediately do that?
Because, well, for one thing, I think a simple reason is balancing magic spells is kind of hard. It's not easy to homebrew spells. I think they're one of the more difficult things to homebrew, save maybe, a class or something really ridiculous. But also beyond that, a lot of the times I think it just doesn't occur to people, because you look at the spell list and it says if you're a wizard you can pick from these spells, and you can also find, and I think this is going to be one of the big topic points, a lot of ways to make a spell your own without changing it.
I completely agree. And part of, I think, everything we've been touching on so far is in 5th edition, Magic has rules. As a wizard, you pick from this list of spells. This is what your spells do. And the spells are pretty cut and dry. They're divided by their level, which designates how powerful they are, or how powerful their effects are. And the spells are pretty straightforward. There are a couple of them that have a little bit of flavor baked into them. An example I would put for that is like Tasha's Hideous Laugh.
Yeah.
That spell actually has some flavor in it. A creature of your choice you can see within range perceives everything as hilariously funny and falls into fits of laughter. Okay, that has some flavor to it. Now, if you take a different spell, like, say, I don't know, Scorching Ray, right? What does Scorching Ray do?
You
create 3 rays of fire and throw them at targets. Make 3 attack rolls. They do this much damage. That's
big flaming hurt lines.
There's not a lot of flavor to something like Scorching Ray, and so you can do a lot to kind of reflavor these and work with these. But the key is their effects are very precise, but their lore is not. There's not a lot of specificity to what it is. And that's a huge departure from previous editions. I know in 4th edition, every single spell had a line of flavor text to give you a concept of how the spell worked or what it was. And that's something that I think 5e is missing, And veteran players who played a lot of D&D know to re-add that and how to make that. But newer players especially can find themselves missing it.
I agree. So let's talk a little bit about how to take these kind of vanilla spells and these really simple options and make them your own and make them really cool. I think as a DM and as a player. And these reflavorings are really easy, and that's the term we always use. You'll hear us talk about it all the time in D&D time. And I think a lot of people in the community do this really heavily and find their own ways to make spells cool in their own. I'm always impressed with the cool ways people kind of come up with to use spells in our community here. But some very simple examples. What we mean by this is you just describe the effect and come up with your own long kind of description for what the effect that you want it to be is. So that Scorching Ray, maybe your Scorching Ray is, instead of just firing just a line of fire, it's 3 phoenixes that kind of made of pure flame that fly out of your hand and encircle and twist around each other before crashing into 3 different targets.
And I mean, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that's more interesting than Scorching Ray. That's all I was going to say.
I completely agree. And something like, for example, Jeremy's big smile.
Duh.
That could just be Tasha's hideous laughter. We can just reflavor that spell completely and change what it says, but mechanically do the exact same thing. You could say, instead of a creature of your choice within range perceives everything as hilariously funny, you could say, a creature of your choice that you can see within range has their mouth enlarged to hilarious proportions. Like,
It
as it curls into a hideous grin. Right, and it does the same thing. They got to roll a wisdom saving throw, or they fall prone and become incapacitated. It's easy. Maybe you describe how their mouth becomes so large it becomes heavy and they fall prone. Right, you make it goofy, you make it whatever you want it to be.
And there are a million ways. You can look at the same spell. Like you could do Tasha's terrible tears, and they cry instead of being, instead of laughing a lot, because you want it to be, you're not playing a goofy character and you don't think the manic laughter fits your character style. You make someone sad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. You can make it into just horrible dread, right? They collapse with absolute existential dread. I see it's a great one in chat from Sword Co here talking about Bless could just be a Kuro Games pep talk. You can do it, right? You can just do whatever you want. And a lot of these reflavorings, I think, are some of the really cool ways to theme your spells around your character.
You can build almost a cohesive story about your character and tell people and the people that you're playing with a lot about your character just by the way that you use and the way that you describe your magic. If all of the spells that you cast in some way involve snakes, I'm going to know that snakes are important to your character. I don't know how you'd make every single spell in 5e be snakes. I like the idea of I like the idea of just Scorching Ray as scorching snakes. And you fire 3 snakes out. They're made of fire.
Pete, it sticks to snakes. You take sticks and throw them, and
they become snakes.
They become snakes that are on fire.
Just disguise snakes, where you disguise yourself as you want teeth. I guess that's what that would be. The point is that you can kind of build up a story, and even if you have never told anyone anything about your character, that like in character you've never discussed why you like snakes and why snakes are important to you or significant to you in some way, every other person at the table is going to be like, well, this guy likes snakes. Snakes matter to this person for one reason or another. And that's a really ham-fisted way of telling a story with spells. But I think it's an example that kind of, explains the point at least. I don't know if I would do exactly what I described there.
Well, and it's the kind of deal where you only need one signature spell. If you have the one spell that you cast more often than the others, let's say we stick with that Phoenix's one, and you are playing a Fire Gensai who worships the great primordial flame, whatever that is. I don't know. I just made that up. I don't know what it is. And you create these elemental phoenixes as part of your Scorching Ray, and that's like your signature move, and you always use that. Even though you're like level 9 now and you really shouldn't be casting Scorching Ray that often, you're still casting your goddamn Scorching Ray. You're just making more phoenix. And that's awesome, because you may be being a little less optimal than casting a 5th level spell. You're casting just a 5th level Scorching Ray instead. But you're really focusing on what makes your character unique and special, and that kind of thing can really give your character a lot more identity and can let everyone else in the story connect with them just a little bit better and understand them just a little bit better, even though it's something so simple as, I make sure I cast Scorching Ray at least once each battle, and when I cast Scorching Ray, this is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I agree completely. Yeah, I was going to say another really great example, and usually we don't do this. Normally we're very abstract, but I think, Pete, it's okay in this case. In DnDTime, if any of you have watched Max Meister in the chat play his character, Dingleheim, Max has gone through and reflavored pretty much all of his spells and abilities to be kind of hex mechanical, right? His magic missile spell is little rockets. His familiar is a little mechanical. It was a seagull last week. Right?
Seagull, but bird or whatever it makes it.
And and his the tensor exploding disc, right, is a mechanized floating
platform with little probably like rockets on the back of it.
Yeah, or I think he might be going for the little ship thing that you could.
Oh yeah.
Either way, taking just a couple of core spells and flavoring them together took what is a crazy inventor character that makes crazy mechanized contraptions, and that's not a class in 5th edition D&D.
Yeah.
There was no, I make crazy science contraptions that blow stuff up and are explosive and are mechanical. That's not. But he made that a thing, and that's awesome. Spider climb spell, that's his mechanized backpack with the spider legs that come out of it, right? Adding that flavor into the character really fulfills that fantasy in a way that otherwise isn't possible with D&D. And that's one of the best things about reflavoring spells. Yes, you can fit stuff uniquely to your character's backstory, but you can fulfill those fantasies, those archetypes that otherwise don't exist.
I've really always wanted to, just kind of on the subject of this, make a mundane wizard where I just come up with mundane uses for all the spells, you know, using material components, things like my alarm spell is just a bell on a string. I've casted alarm spell, but
yeah, right.
You change it like those. That spider climb could just be, I got boots with suction cups. There's a million ways to kind of do that sort of thing and build a theme for yourself.
And what you're talking about there is actually a really cool way that you can play totally modern setting, like modern, you're in New York, everyone's just people in New York, and still use 5th edition D&D rules.
Yep.
Completely.
Mm-hmm.
And that's awesome. That's really cool.
Same
both
thing with
Pete and Jeremy this evening. I know Diadems is crazy.
Yeah, it's been a long time since we've been together under one Twitch stream.
And actually, Pete, you reminded me, going back, there was a boss battle in Pete and Jeremy's D&D time some time ago, Lord Swoldemort. And all of Lord Swoldemort's abilities were just reflavored spells that had to do with muscles or bodybuilding in some way.
Magic muscle instead of magic missile. Those were almost more puns than they were reflavored. But there was reflavoring in the casting, in that, you know, he didn't cast Scorching Ray by using the same material components, or I think it was Burning Hands. He did his Burning Biceps, where he flexed, and then the energy from his muscles produced the power. There's a lot of different ways, like just in the casting or the way you go about doing a spell can also be a thing that you reflavor. It doesn't have to be just the effect of the spell.
And it's important to know as a DM, and especially as a DM, but also as a player, and feel free to bring this kind of thing up to your dungeon master if for some reason they are a stickler on things like components. If a component doesn't have a gold cost, for the most part, it really doesn't matter. Like, I'm sorry, you can make it matter. You can make it important to your character. But having a spellcasting component, like a gem or a crystal or whatever, an orb, means you don't have to have the non-gold cost material components to cast spells. And so really, 5th edition says, yeah, if you have this one item that costs like 25 gold, you don't have to have those material components. You don't have to worry about it. And now there are some exceptions that, like, technically rangers are supposed to have the material components, but even then, there's an item called component pouch, which just says, this has all your components.
This has everything.
Components are intended to be that little bit of flavor that are built into 5th edition D&D spells. Don't limit yourself by those components. And, you know, if there are gold costs on them, like, for example, Revivify has a 300 gold piece diamond as part of its cost. Maybe in a 5th edition, like a modern game that's being played with 5e, let's say you wanted to play Stranger Things, right? And you want to play characters from Stranger Things, and you want to play a Stranger Things setting. Maybe that 300 gold piece is the defibrillator. It works one time. And that's a component for the spell.
Yeah.
It's pretty simple. You forgot to prepare the spell. You forgot the defibrillator at home. See, these are ways that it works without having to be a stickler too much about everything. Yeah, and maybe that defibrillator costs you $300 in game, and that makes what makes sense. So you can reflavor components as well, or outright ignore them if they're really not meaningful. At least that's my personal thoughts on it.
100% same page. This is all very well put, Jeremy. And just a quick shout out before we move on to the next subject, because I know D forgotten one on the subject of, if we're talking muscly boys reflavoring their spells. We have Maglev, I cast Fist, which he just punches. He's just a punch wizard, and then uses his pose as his mage armor. Or punch sorcerer, you're correct.
Yeah, strike a pose, mage armor.
Oh yeah, of course the sorcerer, because he's the sorcerer.
Yeah, he's a sorcerer.
How could I forget the sorcerer? But yeah, shout out. That's a fun reflavor.
We talked a lot about reflavoring spells, and I think there is no end to this discussion. You can go in every which direction with this and really do a lot of interesting things. But there are other ways you can make spells more interesting than just reflavoring them. A lot of spells are versatile enough that you can use them in interesting ways that maybe aren't necessarily anticipated in the spell description. Now, there is definitely like a hard limit to these. There's a point where you push too far and you take advantage of stuff. And that line, that threshold, can only really be found by you playing the game, talking through with your dungeon master. Never rely on pushing a spell beyond what it normally is supposed to do to like save your character's life, because that's going to be a very frustrating circumstance. It's always better to talk to your DM about it if you intend on using a spell in an exotic and interesting way, if you think it could be.
Yeah,
just wanted to put that caveat on there, because I've seen some questionable spell choices in the worst situation.
But now that we've gotten that formality out of the way, let's talk about some of the dumb shit that we've done with spells.
All right. Go ahead, Pete. You want to start us off?
Yeah, this is my personal favorite of mine, where I like the spell Rope Trick. And what that does is you take a rope, 60-foot length of rope, and it kind of climbs up into the air and then hangs itself at the top. And you basically now have a vertical rope that's floating 60 feet above you. And then you got a little extra dimensional portal at the top that you can duck into. It's just a very small pocket dimension for you to hide in if you want to. I played a gnome, so it was very light, and he would tie the rope from Rope Trick all around his body so that when he casted it and kind of use some elaborate knots when he casted it, it just dragged him up in the air 60 feet without him having to climb the rope. So then he just had like a harness and a perch that he could levitate 60 feet and fight fire arrows because he was a ranger. It's a very goofy use of that spell within the spell's rules.
Exactly. Completely ignoring the point of we hide in this. No, this is just a cheap 60-foot levitate.
Yep.
And I love that. I think that's really good. That kind of deal.
Jeremy, what are some of your favorite goofy ones that you come up with?
I'm big in cantrips. I really like using cantrips in exotic and interesting ways because I feel like you can use them so often that you can make them into defining characteristics of your character. Or like recurring, signature spell. And so some of the ones that I really like, I like mending. And what the mending cantrip does, nice and simply, is it takes two broken things and puts them together and they are reforged. They're unbroken. And it takes 1 minute to cast a spell. And I really love this one because you can use it for all manner of different. For example, let's say you have a bunch of chain that have been welded together and then cut apart. Well, you just wrap that person in the chain and mend the ends together while they're unconscious. Or perhaps you have a cage that you got somewhere and you smashed it open. And we knock someone unconscious, we'll stick them in the cage and mend it shut. There's literally no way into it. Doing that kind of stuff is a really interesting way of restraining a character, which I feel like a lot of players, they capture an enemy like, we want to capture this enemy. We want to make sure they don't get away. I tie them up. Rope. And then the DM's like, haha, they escaped. Yeah. And
they untied the rope.
Right. Because the mechanics for getting out of rope or getting out of chains in the book are pretty bad. I mean, no, I'd say bad. They're bad.
You can do it, basically.
Yeah. And I don't know. I really like using mending in that kind of way. It's just
I agree. I agree. This is a cool one I've seen Jeremy do, and I think I've seen another player do it before as well. I wasn't even talking about this. This is just another one I had floating around my dome, which was the locate object spell. Rather than using locate object to locate an object, he memorized an object and then planted it on someone to use it as a tracking device.
Yep.
which is not what the spell was really designed for. I don't think that when they made locate object, they thought, oh, I now have a little homing beacon that I can throw on someone. But that's a way to use the spell and a really creative use of it that could be like, if you have thought of that as a player, that can be like a really like defining thing for your character too. I could imagine like a private eye character who carries a bunch of like really, things that are kind of small and iconic. Yeah, that he can remember, that he like plants these on people all the time, and that's how he kind of like does a lot of his surveillance. I could really picture that character working, and it's because of that creative spell usage.
Or the spell Speak with Plants. Let's say you have a little potted plant, right? And you just put that somewhere people are going to be having secret private conversations. But you've talked with your potted plant. You've informed it of its mission to listen in and be ready. It's an interesting way of handling that kind of thing.
Yeah, I like that one. This was the one I think Jeremy was talking about before that he loves, which is using minor illusion as...
I love minor illusion.
Essentially, if you're a small creature, you can minor illusion something large enough to completely cover you. For example, you can just be a boulder on a rock face if you minor illusion a boulder over yourself.
I love doing that kind of stuff, especially like in the Underdark. If you're playing a small creature, like I think gnomes one of the gnomes actually has minor illusion.
They get minor illusion, yeah,
just by default. I think that's awesome. I might even be an intended use of it, given that they have it as one of their base games. But it's just fun. It's a real cheap. I am invisible. I can't move, but I'm invisible while I stand here, and that kind of thing is interesting. At least
and there's some cover aspects of it, ducking and diving in and out of your little fake boulder. There's a lot cool kind of there with that. Jeremy, do you want to do the shillelagh one you came up with? Because I love that.
Well, I was just gonna say, as well as with the minor illusion, you can do the same thing with shape water if you're underwater. One of the effects of shape water is you can change a water's color or opacity. So you can you're in dark water now. You're in black water. No one can see you in this. And that's an interesting use of that functions very similarly to the minor illusion if you need to hide. But yeah, I really love the shillelagh one. The cantrip shillelagh. It allows you to touch and this one is pushing it. This one's definitely pushing it.
Oh yeah.
It is the wood of a club or a quarterstaff you are holding, so you have to be holding on to it, is imbued with nature's power. For the duration, you can use your spellcasting ability instead of strength, attack, or damage rolls. Well, that doesn't matter. And additionally, the weapon's damage die becomes 1d8. This is important. So let's say you're fighting a giant, and that giant is swinging around a tree trunk at you. You're like, oh my god, 4d12s? They're such a strong giant. And you're like, no, I'm going to grapple that giant, and I'm going to hang on to that tree, and it's going to become 1d8 worth of damage. And then the giant suddenly is very confused as the giant tree trunk stops. And of course, we're pushing it at that point. We're really pushing how powerful.
And as a GM, if I encountered that, I would probably rule either if it's like not important and it's funny, I would let it slide, or if it's going to destroy an encounter and make it unfun, I'd be like, all right, you reduce it the damage die from a D12 to a D8, but he's still huge, so it's 48.
Yeah, and you can do some goofy stuff, and a lot of it's just depending on how much the dungeon master lets you get away with. Certain things though are just plain workable. For example, using the catapult spell to launch a grappling hook up to an area. I've seen a lot of players try and use grappling hooks, and almost universally, it becomes a situation of the DM just repeatedly makes them roll, and it's
until
very
they
frustrating.
get it. Until they get it,
And it's just like, come on.
As a GM, this is a quick side recommendation. If your players are trying to throw grappling hooks up on a wall,
they succeed.
And
just let them do.
They succeed unless in the condition maybe where them not succeeding has a consequence, like they might be noticed for missing. But if they're just doing it in a blank situation,
I mean, I think the worst case is make them roll stealth.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
don't roll if there's no stakes.
That's a tangent. When a player tries to use, especially like an item that's designed to do a thing, they just succeed with the item. That's the point of having it. Like, I'm going to use this python to secure my rope. It works. That's what a python does. Don't fuck your player over for that. In my opinion. That's just not fun.
Earthbind.
Yeah, that's another interesting spell. See, a lot of players when they get to higher levels, right? They always have that feather fall spell prepared because they just in case they fall. Well, Earthbind is the poor man's feather fall.
Or the rich
Earthbind is a
man's
spell.
feather fall.
Well, yeah, right. Earthbind's a level 2 spell, so a higher level character would probably have this prepared. And the intent of it is you can target a flying creature, or if the creature isn't flying speed, it can still target it, and it reduces the flying speed of that creature to 0. So the creature falls out of the sky, and then you can fight it. Really important for like it's a spell that's intended for battling like dragons and things like that.
Is the thing I think they were thinking.
Well, if you fall, you can cast it on you, and then you fall harmlessly to the ground, as the spell says. So it's just a fun little way of being like, this is good. I got it in case you run into a dragon, and I can save me if I fall.
Yeah, not a reaction, which hurts you a little bit, but there are definitely a lot of cool use cases for it.
Fair. Another one, I mean, the classic, like Pete was saying, like in the original Star Wars, suggestion. Go home and rethink your life. That's a suggestion spell right there. Right? Like you can just say, as my suggestion, I say, go to your family and try and make them as happy as you can for the rest of the day. That's a good suggestion. And
it's a very pleasant thing.
And it's the kind of thing that a lot of players don't get with suggestions like, kill your ally. And the Dungeon Master looks at the suggestion spell and looks at the wording on it and says, I don't know if that's a reasonable suggestion. I don't think it works. And the player gets disappointed. And it's like, that's not what it's for. It's for doing this fun, breaking the mold, right? And I know there are some other spells in there like Phantasmal Force that also do that allow you to do something that is just bizarre and strange.
I think one last one here, Jeremy. I actually don't know what you were referring to on that one.
Water Walk. I mean, this is a weird spell. This isn't a weird way of using it. This is just an unusual caveat. If you use Water Walk while you're underwater, you get launched to the surface of the water. It's an interesting add. It's a part of the spell description that no one ever reads that far. They just stop at you can walk on water.
Wait, could you cast Water Walk on yourself and then use Control Water to waterbend under your feet?
Elevator.
To waterbend under your feet and then fly?
Yes, you could.
That's crazy. I never thought of that until just. And these are the kind of things that you can do. Yeah, that's a very good one. These are the kind of ridiculous things that you can do if you start to look at spells. And right now, all we've talked about so far, we're about halfway through, which is good. We've talked about right now, this is all completely within the bounds of just regular. These are the spells as is. Like, you can do all of these reflavors. You can come up with all these cool ways to use the spells and make them your own just in base 5e spellbook. And, like, none of that is written down in the rules of 5e.
But, Pete, what if I'm a dungeon master and I have an enemy that's a spellcaster, but so are my players, and so really this enemy isn't special or unique because the players know everything they can do?
Jeremy, that's a really great question. I'm not sure. That sounds like an impossible situation.
Pete, I was giving you a lead in, Pete.
It was just too hard of a situation.
I hope I didn't stop.
I couldn't handle it. That would have been a good way for the stream to end if it did. No, Jeremy, you're fine if that happens, because what you can do is give your important magical enemies and your important magical characters in your campaigns better magic than is in the 5e rules. And by that, I mean, you can find ways to tweak spells in minor ways where it throws off players' expectations and completely throws them for a loop when they're playing against them. Because when your players are up against a particular spell, for example, a good example might be the sleep spell. Your enemy casts sleep spell on the players and they're like, all right, well, this is bad that such and such, our wizard got knocked out, but I can walk over and wake him up. And then they go to shake that player awake, and this sleep that the enemy has used puts them into a deeper sleep where simply shaking them awake is not enough. Something else has to be done, a condition that you have decided. But the second the player takes their action and goes over and tries to wake up their ally and they're still unconscious, they're going to have that moment where their heart falls into their stomach and they think, oh no.
Fuck.
Yeah, this wasn't what we thought it was. Which is really fun, I think, for players. Even if in that moment it's dread that they feel, that's fun.
And the best way to use that isn't in a, all right, you're already losing, let me do this crazy thing and make you lose more. No.
Exactly.
The best place to use that is in a situation where the players feel like it's a cakewalk. We've got it. It's just a wizard. And then that happens. And that turnaround, that twist of fate, where maybe the party decides to retreat, that is where things get interesting. So I would just recommend, if you are going to do that, do it not in the most dire. And you can do it with a lot of different things. It doesn't have to be sleep. What are some other really cool ways to make spells more interesting?
One that I have used in the past and thought was really fun was I was running a mage who they'd interacted with a bit, and he was a divination wizard who was like a court advisor, and he would read people's minds before they spoke to the king to make sure they didn't have any ill intent. So I gave him the ability to cast the Detect Thought spell without concentrating on it. So as they were moving through the battle, he would read their thoughts and gain insights into their plans and like what some of their tactics were in the battle, while they were kind of in the process of fighting him, which I, ruled as, there'd be times where they'd get disadvantage because he knew, I knew you were going to do this forward thrust here because I read it in your mind. Things along that line. And, finding a way to make a villain that, the Detect Thought spell doesn't allow you to do that. But it was a really cool enemy, and it ended up being a really memorable fight for them because, I extended the reach of what the magic could do for this individual who had mastered that particular spell beyond the scope of what it could have done normally.
And I think that's the best way to do it, is save these kind of things for those important enemies that really have a specific purpose. Give them that signature spell that makes them special. For example, let's say you have this drow worshiper of, maybe not Wolf, maybe, what's the devouring ooze? Which one's that?
Dweeblex?
Ganadauer? Not Ganadauer.
Oh, no, that's Ganadauer. Yep.
It is Ganadauer? Wow, I can't believe I pulled that out of my ass.
I thought you just didn't get Dweeblex, and I was about to.
Maybe, so you have a drow worshiper of Ganadauer, right? This caustic, acidic, devouring ooze of the Underdark. And maybe their special thing is their darkness spell. They can see through it. But beyond that, maybe it also burns with acid while you're within it. And this is an interesting thing because players say, oh, a drow, they cast darkness, no problem. I'm going to chase them into the dark. And now suddenly it's, oh shit, this is a different kind of darkness, right? Something has taken the lore of this character, this nemesis of theirs, worships this caustic ooze god, and reflected it in the mechanic. And I think that is a really, really fun way to make these characters much more interesting.
I also love the idea, just in thinking about that immediately, I was inspired and wanted to make the darkness have an almost like ooze-like wiggle and viscosity to it.
Yeah, right? Perhaps, or maybe with the grease spell, you do a very similar thing. That wizard has the grease spell, and what does that grease do? It boils and bubbles if you end your and you take some damage. Maybe not a lot, but just something.
Indeed, which is cool, and it falls within the realms, like, that's not just a change of the spell, that's cool as well, but also it's a reflavor. You're like fitting the theme, combining the ideas that we have talked about thus far. And I don't think this has to be just for enemies either. I had a character use a spell that I gave him where the players had basically committed some crimes and they wanted to keep records of them. So this person took fantasy photographs of them by running his hand into ink, and then he put his hand onto the paper, and the ink kind of bubbled out and made a perfect picture of him from him looking at it, which would be, I think, about the level of maybe a first level spell in terms of like how big that effect would be. But my players saw that happen, and even though they were sad about being basically getting a criminal record, they thought, oh man, that's really cool. I want to do that cool spell where he takes a picture with his hand in ink. And that one, it builds up the world. It kind of expands the scope of magic for them, where they think, wow, there's a lot of things magic can do that aren't in the book, and that's the force. That's the force that you're trying to get to, is, wow, magic is bigger than just what's written in the text.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's the kind of deal where when you are coming up with these kinds of new magical abilities, right, or expanded magical abilities, try to consider about how strong they might be. There are some guidelines in the Dungeon Master's Guide for balancing what level a spell should be, but don't worry too much. As a general rule, there are some spells that are the best spells at that level. Fireball at level 3 is a really, really powerful example. That is one of the best spells at level 3. And so if you have a damaging spell that you think is around level 3, as long as it's weaker than Fireball, you're probably okay.
Yeah.
Maybe it does some other things that are different than Fireball, but its damage is low. And so you can kind of ballpark based on what already exists. There are so many spells and abilities that already exist in the game. A lot of the time, it's not too hard to create these new features and these new things without. It's not hard. You can just do it.
Not
it's very
too
easy.
much changes. And Jeremy, tell me if you're of the same opinion here on this. I think that if I put something in the game like a weird fireball or that cool like acid grease that you were talking about, or even that photograph spell that I was talking about before, I think it's cool if the players latch onto that for them to make it possible as a GM for them to then learn how to do the things that are listed there.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's a really important, like I said, of playing a wizard or playing any spellcaster really, is finding that lost magic or that secret magic and learning it. That can be really, really exciting for players. I know I personally get really interested in that kind of stuff, whether it be some ancient eldritch secret or a special power gifted to me by my devilish cons from the hell, or what have you. All of these things they're just interesting. They're ways to tie a character deeper into the world, the story, their patron, whatever.
And in the same vein,
they make great rewards for killing bad guys.
Oh, for sure. And there's also a logic to it where it'll kind of, even though it's mysterious at first, it also then makes it feel more realistic. Well, this person learned how to do this thing that I've seen now. I can learn how to do it too, because I'm a person in this world and I can do the same research that they did. It might be difficult. It might be hard to do something cool that a player sees and figure out how to do a certain magic. But it's definitely something that I think, I don't even want to say should be possible for players to do if you introduce something like that into your world that's a little bit outside of the normal rules.
Yeah, and of course sometimes there are exceptions to that. For an example, that drow that worships Ganadar. Maybe you have to worship Ganadar to get that magic. And sure, if your player wants to do that, they can. There's just not a lot of reason my lawful good paladin of whatever is going to suddenly worship Ganadar to get this weird magic.
Would to do this, yeah.
So, there are RP ways that you can kind of block these spells off if they are maybe a little too weird.
Yeah.
But as a general rule, I'm with Pete. Try to keep your mind open, because most of these interesting new exotic abilities you can come up with aren't really going to break the game, and they're just another cool reward for players. It's a really good thing to spend gold on, actually, for if you have issues with your players not knowing what to spend their gold on, or researching the spell. Ta-da! Is one thing.
Jeremy, let's talk about that big magic, because we talked about this, I think, a little bit.
Big magic.
I'm talking about that magic that the gods used when they made the earth, and the old magic,
Can I talk about some not as big magic first?
Yeah, sure.
So one of the things that I really like, because that's getting big at that point. We're getting huge.
Okay.
At this point. But let's say we look at kobolds, right? You look at the kobolds kobolds are a great example, because if you look at all of the kobolds that exist now, there's the kobold, there's the kobold dragon shield, there's a kobold elite, there's a kobold inventor, a kobold scale sorcerer, a kobold with wings. There are kobolds that do a lot of different things. In 4th edition, they had a lot of different monsters. They had with different categories. Strikers, monsters that did DPS. That's all they did. They stood up in front, they took damage, and they did damage. They had lurkers who lurked around like rogues and did big spikes of damage but were really fragile. You had all sorts of types. You had leaders which supported other monsters. And these categories of monsters, ways of thinking about them, made for interesting combat. You know, you walk into the goblin cave and it's not 15 goblins and they all have the same short bow attack and that's all they do. A little more nuance and diversity to the foes you were fighting could make a fight a lot more exciting. And when you look at kobolds, you have those options because there are a lot of different kobolds that have been printed this far.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not always the case. For example, goblin. There are only 2 goblins. The goblin and the goblin boss.
Oh, I see where we're going. Yeah.
So how do you make those more interesting? How do you make a couple of these other types of creatures? And I mean, one way to do it is through magic, right? I mean, obviously you can take little mockeries of class features. Maybe you give a rogue one of the goblins sneak attack to make him into a roguey kind of goblin, but you can give them magic too. For example, giving one of the goblins pass without trace, the effects of that spell. That goblin becomes your rogue because they stealth and they're gone. Maybe you give one of the goblins a spell. You give them Firebolt or Scorching Ray. Sorry, go ahead, Pete.
I was gonna say, I really like that way of doing it, of just giving them, like, it's not like they're a caster. They just have the pass without trace spell.
Exactly, and it's just they are under the effect of it. Or perhaps, like you give them a spell like Scorching Ray, and that caster goblin can cast Scorching Ray 3 times. And don't worry about other spells. That's the only spell they care about. They're a caster goblin. That's all they need to do.
Yeah.
And doing it in that kind of way can create a really diverse set of enemies right there with the goblin, a goblin boss, which is just a bigger goblin that doesn't want to, that's it. That's all the goblin boss is.
Yeah.
Goblin boss, sneaky goblin, and fire throw goblin. And you've got an interesting encounter there. You like legitimately have an interesting encounter. And that's cool. Perhaps you create a goblin and this is your tanky goblin. And you look at the false life spell and you say, yeah, at the beginning of his turn, I'm going to just have him be under the effect of the false life spell. That's what this goblin does. That's why he's special. I'm going to roll that D4 and give him those hit points every turn at the beginning of his turn. And they're temporary hit points.
And then he probably gets a name too.
Yeah.
That goblin sounds like he's named, Gabo or whatever. That's a good goblin name too.
It's better than the goblin.
It's better than Gabo.
I don't know. Gabo's a good name.
Gabo.
Gabo's a spellcaster.
I'm Gabo.
The point is, you can take low-level creatures, or even high-level creatures, right? And take simple abilities and say, they're always under the effect of this ability. And boom, you have a much more interesting creature. A goblin boss, maybe that goblin boss is always under the effects of the heroism spell.
It's the exact spell I just thought.
Suddenly you have and actually that would probably make more sense for the tanky goblin guy, who just goes up in the front and doesn't die.
Yeah.
But making these more diverse creature types really, really easy to do. Anyone can do it. You just have to look at a couple spells, familiarize yourself with the options that are already in the game. Wizards Art has already done all the work for you. And the best part about them is those creatures, they're not that much stronger because it's a level 1 spell on a CR 1/2 creature. Like they're a little bit stronger, but it's only a level 1 spell. Like your players have 4 of them probably. So
I agree.
It doesn't make a huge difference. And I think it makes a really interesting nuance to the game, especially as the characters get to higher level.
I agree with all these things.
All right, Pete. Now we can get on to that big magic.
Can I talk about big magic?
Pete.
Put big magic. We don't have a time.
Yeah, Direwolf was Shadow Step. I don't think Shadow Step's a spell, but I know you meant Misty Step, and that's sick.
Big magic. And when I say that, what I mean is that old magic that shaped the world magic. If you're running a game in which you want magic to be mysterious, there is nothing more mysterious than the most powerful magic that is beyond the comprehension of the players and characters in your game, I would say. And so use that kind of stuff. You can make magic do stuff that you don't know what the spell was. You don't know why the spell was cast and how it happened that this mountain is now floating in the air. but you know that you want this cool floating mountain to exist, and you know that it happened during the sundering of the ancient times. And when the players see that floating mountain, they're going to think, I mean, for one thing, they're going to think righteous, a floating mountain, but they're also going to gain a kind of a little bit of extra respect for the magic in your world when you have things that are on that kind of large scale. If, and this is with the caveat, if you're in a setting in which you want magic to be a focus and kind of have that high magic setting. That doesn't work in a low magic setting, I would say, and I think a lot of that old magic, honestly, even it almost does. It just depends on, you know, your game to a degree. But I think having those things in your world that feel impossible and ancient and could not be accomplished in the modern age, but at some time these things were done, can really enhance the way magic feels in your world and make your players pine for that greater power that presumably exists.
Yeah, absolutely. Having the impossible occasionally be possible, that's what people are looking for. That's what your players are trying to find when they're exploring, when they're adventuring. They're looking for that bit of impossible, that little sliver of impossibility. And having them find it and having it be so grand, not a sliver of mountain, right? That it's awesome. It's exciting, and it can really draw characters in. I wouldn't use it all the time, personally.
Yes, you don't want to overdo that kind of thing.
Because when all of the cities are flying rock cities, it's not important.
Mm-hmm.
It's not special. It's just part of the setting. And I think that kind of devalues it a little bit. But
there are, I'd say I think there are other ways to do it too. Like, this is something that I've always latched on to because I like it and I've seen it in media and mythology a ton of times. And they kind of reinforce it in Dungeons and Dragons in the lore sections, and that's in the names of characters and things. And like, I always like this kind of feeling of there being other types of magic beyond the magic that you're talking about. For example, there's magic and knowing something's true name that cannot be kind of comprehended and that supersedes. It's not like casting a spell. It's something different where it's just an inherent power in a word, which feels really cool. And as a player, like, you learn something's true name and you all of a sudden have power over this thing for just knowing this one strange word. That feels awesome. And it also makes it feel like, well, it affects this thing. Everything probably has a true name. It expands that concept of what the world is and the way it functions, and makes them feel like there's more to it than just is on the surface.
Yeah, and it's interesting because if you look at how a lot of people see magic in D&D, a lot of people, especially in very modern countries, they'll think of magic like science. There is a scientific method, there is this, that, and the other thing. There's this little atoms or whatever, and that's what magic is. But that doesn't have to be the case. There are things that can break the mold. There are creatures that can warp reality. There are beings that can read your thoughts, right? That can control what you are and who you are. And those things, finding those old, ancient, terrible things are, I don't know, it's part of the appeal of really playing this kind of game. And it's breaking that kind of that false mindset that everything follows a logical progression. Breaking that mindset is, I think, the most important thing for a newer DM, for a DM, for a newer player, to get them thinking in a more wondrous side of things. I mean, Pete, I feel like you were alluding to The Name of the Wind when you were talking about everything has a name. And
to an extent, but that's actually a trope I've seen quite a few times.
Yeah.
But that's definitely on the list. I love The Name of the Wind.
Very good book. If any of you have ever seen The Name of the Wind or read The Name of the Wind, great book by Pat Rothfuss, great author. I would actually also highly recommend The Slow Regard of Silent book. Holy shit, that book.
And they do it in Aragon too.
Aragon does it. But
and that's always how
Aragon feels more like bad science to me. is the thing. They
That's
try
fair.
and make it feel more science-y.
That's fair. And that's kind of how I think like the Lord of the Rings magic feels. Like when in the moment where, oh my God, why can't I'm going and drawing an absolute blank on her name. The No, this is going to tear me apart from the inside. The elf played by Liv Taylor, whose name I cannot remember, the only like female character of note.
I don't know who Liv Taylor is. We're talking about Galadriel, right?
No, not Galadriel. I guess I forgot about Galadriel. She's another female character of note.
Yeah, you said female elf, and I'm like, oh, Galadriel.
No, the other female elf character that Aragorn was in love with. Regardless, I think there's a really, this is going to kill me that I can't remember her name. There's a point where she carries Frodo across the river while she's being chased by these ancient wraiths, and then you see her start to like incant a spell, and she's just saying like words in Elvish, and her voice kind of echoes, and it's just a bunch of Elvish or whatever, and then all of a sudden the river swells, and the river just cascades down and washes away all of these enemies. And the river looks like horses for a moment, and it's visually really stunning. And doesn't feel like she casted a spell. That felt like she asked the river to come help, and it did.
Yeah,
and that's cool
the
magic.
Feeling you want.
Yeah,
that's absolutely what you want, especially with that old man.
That's all I have to say about magic.
Yeah, I think for now, for this, we didn't talk at all about lore. We didn't really talk about what spells are good and bad. We talked about a couple of interesting uses for spells, but I think Eowyn is exactly who we were talking about.
No, I
good pickup in chat.
Is it Eowyn?
It might have been.
I thought Eowyn was... Yeah, Arwen. There we go.
Arwen. Anyway, yeah, that's old magic. I hope that this has been helpful for some of you. But for now, let's switch gears over to our other segment, Ask Pete and Jeremy. This is a segment where y'all can ask us whatever questions you want, and we will answer them. You can check them out, or you can add questions right now on our Discord server in the Ask Pete and Jeremy channel. So without further ado, let's head up to our most recent question. Jesus Christ. All right. Switch asks. Oh, I like this. This is like a real good question.
All right. Where are we at?
Jeremy and Pete, do you feel like the shop is in a good place as it stands? I personally think potions are a little strong at their current price. Armor is way too easy to upgrade in the first time, but lacks any better forms because charms are literally the last thing people consider buying. Interesting.
I feel... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, it's interesting because I think Switch hit on two really interesting things there. The two probably least interacted with parts of the shop are potions and charms. And I think most people would argue the opposite of what you're arguing there, saying that potions are too strong and charms are potions are infrequently used and charms are too strong, I think. We have a couple of players that really like to engage with that side, the charm side of things. We've got a couple of players who really like to engage with the potion side of things and pick up potions. I don't know.
I think my response is yes. I think the shop is in a pretty good spot. For one thing, you said too easy to upgrade the armor as well for the first time. We did that very much intentionally. We wanted people to be able to finish an adventure and get their upgraded armor, but lacks any better forms. And the reason for that also is because we don't want AC stacking to be required or even extant when we can avoid it. And there are certainly items in the bag, and that's a possible thing. And I know there's some very high ACs from the olden days, a lot of which I think me and Jeremy would admit was a bit of a mistake to allow us back in the day.
Well, I think the main goal of the shop, right, at this point is to have two different progression paths. For those who are interested in the more RNG, let's see what we get out of the bag, we have Bartholomew's Big Bag Bonanza. And for those who want to know exactly what they get every time, there are the charms. And so two very distinct paths that players can go on. And so far, I've been pretty happy with it. I think the biggest issue with charms at this point has been Pete and I's switching them out. We haven't been as diligent as we need to. And there's been a lot of weird stuff going on. But that's something we need to be a little more cognizant of in the future. But I agree with Pete. I'm pretty happy with where the shop is right now.
And as far as the potions being a little bit strong, that's a thing that we'd rather err on the side of strength with something that is going to be consumable and that you're just going to have to burn if you buy it, because you're spending your money on something impermanent in a game where potions normally getting something impermanent in I think most games it's like, well, yeah, it's impermanent, but it's going to keep me alive. In a lot of cases, it's okay if you die at D&D time, so it's not as important to have those. So if you want to do that and keep yourself alive in the game to game, we want that to be a little bit more on the high side.
Yeah, I completely agree. The Forgotten One asks, for Anadolch's next game, which elemental babe should you summon first? Acid, cold, fire, thunder, or lightning? If it still retains its elements for a choice, that is. I want you to pick the first one regardless of the monsters the party faces.
Which elemental babe do you want to encounter?
Fark, you hit the nail on the head. I want thunder. I want to see the elemental thunder babe.
There it is. It's been decided. My instinct was I wanted to see the elemental babe of lightning, but the thunder babe is, I think, a great pick as well.
And we have one final question from Matty Morgs. What memorable monk have you played for, or played as, or run for, and what made that character /NPC /monster so memorable? I've got one. Do you?
I've only run for one monk.
Not a lot of monks.
I only run for one monk outside of DnDTime, that is. I know there's been several in DnDTime, but
yeah, obviously we're not going to talk about DnDTime characters in this.
Yeah,
we're not here to play favorites.
So I think the answer has to be PQJZ. Oh wait, no, he was a druid, and I think of him as a monk because he gained monk abilities later on. He was part monk, and so I'm going to count him. He was a druid monk hybrid, and he was Kung Fu Panda. He turned into animals and then fought with his monk abilities in his animal forms. It was really funny, and I liked it quite a bit. That character had a lot more to it, but that was like his monk thing, is that he was Kung Fu Panda.
Matty Morgs, I know you weren't trying to bait the favorites. My favorite monk, I think, this is a weird one, Gurk the Drunk. And I think the reason for that is he has such a good story to it. So Gurk the Drunk was a character back in college. I ran a lot of West Marches type of games. And Gurk the Drunk was one of the many characters that went out on those. There were many casualties. And one of those casualties was one of Gurk's friends. His best friend, a little druid. What was the druid's name?
I know the one. I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
It's off the top of my head, but I can't remember. And what happened with Gurk the Drunk? He was a barbarian, of course. He got very drunk and went into battle. And then his best friend died, and this shook Gurk to his core, such that he sobered up and became Gurk the Sober, sworn to avenge his fallen ally and bring them back from the grave. And I think Gurk the Drunk succeeded, actually.
Yeah, I believe he did. Well, there was also that kind of progression where he started out as a barbarian, and then he switched over to monk, I think, when he became Gurk the Sober. And then, like, when we played him...
I don't think he even, like, cross-classed. I think he just totally shifted.
Yeah. And then I think when he played again in, like, we played, like, a level 21 shot. He was, like, at level 20. He was back to Gurk the Drunk. But it was, like, a monk-barbarian thing where it was, like, he had mastered drunkenness. It wasn't, like, Drunken Master. It was, like... It was some way a more spiritual... It was like a more spiritual version of Drunken Master.
It was very bizarre.
It was a very interesting character.
But yeah, I guess that would be my answer. The dramatic emotional shift. I dig that. But with that is our last question for the evening. Thank you everyone for hanging out. Of course, we love you all. We've got more D&D time throughout the week. On Friday, Pete and Jeremy's D&D Time 3 1-hour one-shot featuring you. It's going to be great. And then on Sunday, we're going to be doing D&D Time Brews. Depending on how this next 2 days go, we might be coming back to our potion-centric class. Data. I'm trying to talk to the audience.
Yeah,
He doesn't
Data.
care. But we might go back to that potion-centric class we were working on, the Potion Master.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
There's a lot of other work oh my goodness, still need to do to get that in a workable spot. So if that isn't the case, we'll instead be taking a swing at magic items, and not just random ass magic items, but specifically we'll be diving into the magic item suggestions from you, and we'll be kind of sifting through that and giving our kind of our thoughts on how we go about figuring those out. And yeah, it's gonna be cool. There's a ton of items.
That might be a that might also be like, we had talked about this a little bit, Jeremy, but we might just have a nice sit-down day at one point, regardless of whether or not we do that, and maybe even on like another, like a Wednesday or something like this, and really talk about how we rate and choose magic items and fix them and stuff like that.
Yeah, I feel there are just so many things that are submitted. There's a point where it just hits an overflow for us.
Yeah.
So we feel like it'll be very helpful to sit down and talk through that.
Indeed. So I think that's about all we got coming up for the rest of this week. Tune into our other content. Thank you all very much for hanging out. Do we have any extra thank yous today?
Oh my goodness, I totally spaced. I don't have Streamlabs open. Oh my goodness, I am so sorry, audience. I need to go open that now. I normally have it open, but today, for some reason, my brain has farted, and I have failed in the most heinous of ways. I don't know if I'll ever quite forgive myself, but if I do, it's
don't let them
now.
stall. Don't let them stall.
Yeah, hey, there is no, we don't have any follows or anything today.
Oh no! If you're there and
it's okay,
if you're there and you can follow, we're at 400. Jeremy, we're at 498 followers.
Holy shit! Really?
Yeah, we're 2 away from a big milestone. So look forward to that.
That's pretty incredible now that you mention it, Pete. But I don't see my followers as simple numbers. So
I do when they are at I do when they are at exactly 500. I see them as one complex number.
I guess we got to say one last thing then, because we don't have anyone to thank today. If you know anyone who you think would like D&D Time, would like any of our content, whether it be D&D Time Talks, D&D Time Brews, Pete and Jeremy's D&D Time, or any of our other shows, let them know. Say, hey, you should come check these guys out. Believe it or not, we do put a lot of effort into making all this stuff happen and trying to put this content out for you guys. So if you know someone who you think would like it, share it. We're here for you all.
Indeed. In that case, much love to all of you. I'm Pete.
And I'm Jeremy. And this is
DnDTime Talks.
Good night,
everyone. We're going to be really out of sync, and I know
it's going to be perfectly in sync.
Because it was really in sync on my side, and that always means it's bad.
Uh-oh.